what I want to share with you is this hypothesis that automation or the technological revolution, including AI, implies a race between education and technology. This is a phrase that Nobel Prize-winning economist coined in the 1970s to argue that education helps to equalize incomes precisely because changes in the workplace and society, technical changes, require changes in education systems, and as education systems prepare people for the world of work, their skill levels go up and you promote equity. So that was pretty much the story of the 20th century. Educational advances kept pace or were ahead of the curve in terms of technical changes so that workers were prepared. The situation is different today. We have some seeming contradictions. One is that educational attainment, we're living through a revolution in terms of educational attainment, access to schooling, years of schooling that the children have. And in the next couple of decades, there will be a convergence in terms of access to schooling between rich and poor countries throughout the world. But at the same time, there's a growing difference in learning outcomes. The more we know, the more we find out about learning outcomes in countries outside of the OECD, outside of the high-income countries, the greater the learning challenge is. So the gap seems to be growing. It's not really growing, it's just that we're measuring more and we're finding out just how poor education systems are at delivering the most basic, fundamental cognitive skills. And this is leading to a great mismatch in terms of skills that are needed and skills that are being supplied. So we're seeing at the same time a growing demand for skills and a growing wage differential. So the more skills you have, the higher the wage in relative terms that you can demand. And this was a phenomenon that started in the 80s and 90s in the US and North America, and now it's spread worldwide. So the gaps between those with higher levels of schooling and lower levels of schooling are actually growing. So rather than contributing to equity, education is contributing to growing inequality. And contributing to this, I argue, automation and the technological revolution at the same time is promoting de-skilling for many people and a demand for new skills for many others, and fundamentally challenging the education systems that we have in all countries. The successful countries, or the seemingly successful countries, are able to navigate this by doing, I would argue, three things. One is to invest early childhood development, early childhood education, to invest in their workers' or ability to invest in their skills, relevant skills that are demanded, and I'll talk more about relevant skills in a moment. And they tend to use information for driving policy reform and policy changes, and think of Singapore as an example of this. We're also seeing throughout the world, in rich and poor countries, increasing demand for higher education. And this is not unrelated to what's happening. So the three biggest priorities for countries would be investing on basic skills, basic knowledge, even though the challenge is to produce these higher order skills. But given that we have a very sequential education system, if you think about it, education is the sector that's probably the most sequential. There is very little choice. You may want higher education, but that means you go to primary school, you go to high school, and then get into higher education. So the basic fundamental skills is the first priority. The second is developing system outside of the formal education system to allow workers to invest, again, in relevant skills as those skills change throughout their working lives. And then finally, using information from the labor market, from other sources to drive policy changes and to look for innovations in order to finance and continue to finance higher education. So the other contradiction I wanted to mention is that technology is threatening the education and learning system throughout the world and leading to demand for higher order skills. So we're seeing a challenged education systems, yet the returns, benefits, monetary benefits to education are increasing. So how is that happening? Typically, you get higher demand, and that leads to higher wages, and that's definitely due to the higher demand for higher skills. But at the same time, the growing differential also has to do with the fact that most of the products of the education systems are of poor quality, so therefore the premium for those who do manage to get the skills that are in demand is raising the differential for them. So the inequality, both in terms of raising salaries for those with the higher skills and lowering the relative salaries for those with less skills, and therefore that's the inequality challenge that we have. So for many systems, expansion of schooling will lead to inequality if things don't change. If there's not fundamental reform, the more we invest in education, the higher the inequality that will be produced as a rule. The biggest challenge that we have from the world of work and technological changes is the effect that automation will have on tasks and jobs. There's a very famous study by two Oxford economists that argued that 47% of jobs in the United States are at threat of automation. It's misinterpreted study, didn't talk about job loss, but it said that 47% of jobs would be affected by automation. Could be affected positively, could enhance people's skills and productivity, or it could affect you in the sense that jobs could be lost. And that challenge to education system is really where more thought needs to go into what kinds of skills are we producing and what's being demanded. So school systems in many, especially developing countries, have the dual challenge of promoting basic skills, which they don't do very well, and now they have to produce those new skills that the world of work is demanding, which also is even more difficult. And this is not just a question of STEM subjects, that's part of it, but also trying to produce those skills that would be safe even in a world of automation that would tend to replace some of the jobs or tasks that are easy to replicate the more routine kinds of tasks. So what are those skills that workers would need to develop? Some of these are called creative and social skills, complex perception skills, manipulation, persuasion skills, problem-solving social skills. Sometimes they're called non-cognitive, socio-emotional skills, and the like. What we have now in the literature is people have measured these skills. They've done surveys, they've looked at the demand from employers, and the demand has increased. We're also seeing for the first time an increase, willingness to pay more for those skills. So the more you have of these kinds of skills, the higher the demand is in the labor market and the higher your salaries are. So this is being felt in the markets, and again, it's contributing to growing inequality because very few people relative to the whole labor market are able to demonstrate these skills. So the challenge then is to develop these kinds of skills within an education system that is already quite traditional and in many countries quite overloaded in terms of teaching the basic fundamental skills. So in our work on what kinds of systems and what is needed to produce that kind of system and to affect those changes, we've identified 6 necessary reforms, I would say, and I'll mention these briefly. The first is assessment. Many countries lack the basic information about learning outcomes. All countries have some kind of selection exam that comes late in the cycle, not really useful for informing policymakers and instructors. Assessment is needed throughout the school cycle and needs to come in place when teachers and policymakers can use it to affect changes. The second is autonomy. We're demanding more autonomy of workers and managers, but education systems lack this basic function in most cases. The ability to make day-to-day decisions, not to only follow curriculum and standards. So basic principle of autonomy. When you increase autonomy, you also need to have some kind of accountability system, and again, that's often missing in systems throughout the world. Accountability, not just holding people responsible, but also having a system that allows for checking, for monitoring, for informing decision makers, and allowing for the autonomy and the assessment to play a better role. So autonomy, assessment, accountability need to go together. Fourth is the teacher. Despite tremendous technological improvements in the way people teach and learn, the teacher is still fundamental. In every education system, in rich and poor countries, the biggest single item in the education budget is the salary of teachers. That is the first thing that comes in the budget, the most important part of the education training system. And if you look at the high-performing education systems, these are systems that tend to have the best graduates go into teaching colleges. It's very difficult to get in, it's very difficult to become a teacher, and they tend to be supported very well. So having a high-quality teaching labor force is a prime need for education systems that perform. Fifth is an attention to the early years, early child development, preparing children to enter school, preparing them to become readers early on, preparing the physical as well as social, psychological preparedness for schools. This has been measured for many years. We have solid evidence of the benefit of early child development and later success. You want more people to go to university, best investment is invest in early child development. And this is true in high-income countries, true in low-income countries. And sixth is the attention to culture. One thing that often gets missed in education reforms is the question of culture. And this could be as simple as language of instruction, systems that pay attention to what language works for people, in especially multilingual or bilingual environments, but also paying attention to working with the culture and allowing that to flourish. If you look at the recent Japanese education reforms, which have been quite successful in terms of measures like academic achievement, they pay a lot of attention to cultural development at a very early age. If you're lucky enough to be in a small town in Japan and see the school children in the morning and how the whole town moves out of their way, and the building of the responsibility very early on. So very strong technical education system in terms of building fundamental cognitive skills, but also building those social and emotional skills at a very early age. And then, in addition to those six factors, I would say education systems are not using the information revolution, which is also a threat to them, but also a potential tool for improving the teaching and learning experience. Very little application, I would say, of technology in education systems anywhere. Despite the promise, the potential, we don't see a lot of this. Some simple things like using modern technology just to improve the management information system, which is poor in many developing countries, would be a positive step. But also using this to promote a more modern education system that allows people to continue learning throughout the day and throughout their lives, because one thing that we may not be able to predict what those tasks will be in the future, but definitely the ability to learn and relearn will be a skill that people need. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harry. I would like to remind you that this Slido channel is still open. Over there you can see the URL is pretty straightforward, sli.do, and the hashtag is the same, #3CLTruth. So if you want to put forward your comments or your questions anonymously or not via Slido, this is still working. It's open in front of me, so I can put forward your queries. I would like to take all the questions and remarks after all the presenters have done their presentation. So next in line is Dr. Toni Sant from MediaCityUK, and he's going to talk about Wikipedia. I think we all know what Wikipedia is, but there's more to it than what we see actually on the website. And he's going to talk about fake news, points of view, and assuming good faith, given that we all know that Wikipedia is user-generated. It's not from a central authority.
Thank you, Martin. Yes, indeed. I mean, we all know what Wikipedia is, but how do you use Wikipedia? And which is why also the first word in the question to the title of my presentation is how. So how do you use Wikipedia? I assume you all look things up on Google, and on the side to the right, you get a box for some of the things you look up that is populated with information that comes from Wikipedia. You sometimes click on that because it's big and shiny, and you end up on Wikipedia as the first source of information. How many people, however, have written Wikipedia? Edited Wikipedia? Well, that's good. I see some hands, so that's good. So you can see that there are people in this room who have created some of those things that you read. I hope I don't shock you when I tell you that everyone in this room could write Wikipedia. Yeah? And that's what we're hoping, because then we stop talking about fake news, we stop talking about post-truth, and we talk about consensus truth. Yeah? Is it 6 or is it half a dozen? They're both true. And one doesn't exclude the other. They're just different perspectives on the same thing. So that's a preamble. If we can go to the next slide. So I would start with a disclaimer to tell you what my bias is. I've done previous work for Wikipedia, some of which was paid even. I've been an unpaid Wikipedia editor since 2010. I've performed over 1,500 edits. I created 120 pages on Wikipedia, 10 of which are actual articles. So although I've created 120 pages, some of those are discussion pages, some of those are help pages, some of those are redirect pages, some of those are disambiguation pages. But my claim to fame is that I created the Wikipedia article for fatberg, which is the mass lump of fat that you find in sewers beneath large cities. Look it up, it's on Wikipedia. I was a Wikimedia UK employee, which is to say I worked for the Wikimedia Foundation's chapter in London for 2 years between 2013 and 2015, where I was paid to organize their education program, which is to say we went into schools and universities and taught students how to edit Wikipedia and how to write Wikipedia rather than cite Wikipedia. And that was our slogan, write Wikipedia, don't cite Wikipedia, because, well, that's what their teachers were telling them, and that's what we were also telling them, don't cite Wikipedia. Wikipedia is just an encyclopedia, and we do mean just an encyclopedia. The other thing in my disclaimer is that since 2016, I have been a founding trustee of the local affiliate of the Wikimedia Foundation from San Francisco in Malta, and that's Wikimedia Community Malta, which is a registered non-profit in Malta. They're called voluntary organizations. Elsewhere, they're called non-profits, charities, what have you. So that's Wikimedia Community Malta. So you can see I speak from a place of bias, which is to say my perspective on Wikipedia is very subjective, and it is inflected by these experiences, these realities these truths that I know to be real. Let's go to the next slide, please, Martin, which indeed, again, picks up the question with the how. How can Wikipedia save us all? So how indeed? Yeah, so this is a how question. And before we really tackle it the way I've intended to tackle it, and for the sake of some nostalgia, if you will, for the old style of normality with the pre-fake news and the pre-truth world, in what ways can Wikipedia save us? I'm not particularly sure that that's the way we are best served looking at this question. You know, I don't want to take it too literally and look at ways that Wikipedia can save us. I don't want to tell you how this ends. Wikipedia doesn't save us. But there are things I would like to discuss over the next few minutes that I have allocated to me about how indeed Wikipedia could, if you will, save us all. So the way I will do this is to show you that, like all the major religions of the world, Wikipedia has a set of truths that it holds immutable, like the Ten Commandments in the Judeo-Christian tradition, or the Noble Truths of Buddhism, or the Five Pillars of Islam, and what have you. Well, there's a five pillars also of Wikipedia. So the first is one we've already touched upon, and that is Wikipedia is an encyclopedia. Wikipedia is not a news site. The Wikimedia Foundation, which runs Wikipedia, does run a news site, and it's called Wikinews. And it operates on the same software and on the same philosophy that the encyclopedia operates at Wikipedia, but it's a different service. It's written from a neutral point of view, and this is something I will dwell on in a minute after I've gone through these five. The next is that Wikipedia is free content that anyone can use, edit, and distribute. And this gives two meanings to the word free. It's free as in, I don't know, free beer or free lunch. Is there such a thing? But it's also free as a bird. Well, not in Malta, but yeah, birds are free in most other parts of the world. You get what I mean. Wikipedia editors should treat each other with respect and civility. So this is another thing that we'll dwell on, because this assumes there is good faith amongst people. So no one accuses anyone else on Wikipedia. Wikipedia editors don't call out each other saying that what's being produced is fake news, or that something's a lie, or that you know. So respect and civility are at the heart of Wikipedia. And the one that I like best is that Wikipedia has no firm rules, which works very well for me as an anarchist and a Buddhist and all sorts of things that, anyway, and a relapsed nihilist. If we could go, what happened? Okay. Yeah, okay. So this is the concept of all points, a neutral point of view is one that I prefer to look at as all points of view, because all points of view kind of neutralize each other. It is one of the main principles that we just saw on Wikipedia, was number 2 on that list. But it is one of 3 content policies. So aside from a neutral point of view, there's something which is a challenge to truth, which is verifiability. It's not important whether something is true or not, as much as whether it is verifiable. And so I've heard the wonderful T word thrown around quite a bit in the previous panels, and that is transparency. We get to transparency by having verifiability. So I said or didn't say something if you can verify whether I said or didn't say something, not whether it's actually true or not that I said something or didn't say something. And also that because it's an encyclopedia, there's no original research. So the verifiable sources come from others, from elsewhere. So what someone else has said, someone else has produced, rather than myself or any other Wikipedia editor. Now it's interesting, if you look up Wikipedia neutral point of view, that's the abbreviation for it, WP NPOV on Wikipedia. What you get is you get the policy, and it says that this policy is non-negotiable, and the principles we've just looked at, upon which it is based, cannot be superseded by other policies or guidelines, nor by editor consensus. There are no firm rules, remember? That was number 5, including that there are no firm rules. That's not a firm rule in itself. So it's a tautology. It's beautiful. So there you have it. This is set in stone. This is a very cornerstone of what Wikipedia is about, where there are no firm rules. And verifiably, very transparently, this is even more than a firm rule. Yeah? This is non-negotiable. So, in looking at the idea that came from the fourth pillar, which is civility and respect, we're assuming good faith. And so here, there's something called Hanlon's razor, which you can also look up on Wikipedia, which claims that you should never attribute malice to what is adequately explained by stupidity. Yeah? And you know, I mean, one of the people who keep coming up today is, of course, Donald Trump. In this case, is, you know, what the stance of assuming good faith. You know, I don't think there's malice in much of what Donald Trump says, but I do think there's a lot of stupidity. And that's me espousing Hanlon's razor. However, Goethe in 1774, in The Sorrow of the Young Werther, wrote, "Misunderstandings and neglect occasion more mischief in the world than even malice and wickedness." So perhaps misunderstandings and neglect, yeah? At all events, the two latter are of less frequent occurrence. That's a bit of a clumsy translation from the German, but it's faithful to the German. So they're less frequent. Malice and wickedness are more a misunderstanding. There's more misunderstanding and neglect when Donald Trump says things like, "in my infinite wisdom," for example. That's not malice. That's not wickedness. That's just a neglect of modesty, shall we say? You know. So anyhow, that's debatable. That's fine. This is just to present to you this idea of assuming good faith. So fake news is the thing that keeps cropping up, and we'll come back to this in a couple of minutes in my conclusion. What I would like to point you out to right now is that if you were to look at something on Wikipedia itself and look for Wikipedia : potentially unreliable sources, you'd be surprised of some of the sources that are not considered to be a good place to find as a verifiable source. And so one of this, if Martin could go back to the next slide, please. One of these is one that was even reported in the news not too long ago. And in 2017, Wikipedia banned the British paper, the Daily Mail, which is read by millions of people, of course, as an unreliable source. Yeah? It was banned as an unreliable source. And so if you were to look at that previous keyword I gave you, with the potentially unreliable sources, you'll see that this is one of them, and you would expect that some of the other sources that you would expect as unreliable sources are also listed there. I do hasten to say, though, that CNN is not one of them, even though, it is fairly accused of presenting fake news, for example, as is the Times of Malta, for example. The Times of Malta is frequently accused of presenting fake news by politicians, but it is not on the list of unreliable sources, Martin. The idea of post-truth, if you look this up on Wikipedia, you get this quote from Sean Illing that says that post-truth is the disappearance of shared objective standards for truth. Yeah? So all it is a common point of view, which is why we prefer to have the many points of view. Israel is both the land that the Israelis claim it to be, but it is also an occupied territory of Palestine. Both are true. One doesn't exclude the other unless you side with either the Israeli or the Palestinian side. So the consensus truth is that these are two nations. Neither one of the two sides will likely say that that's the truth. Their truth is the truth. So the but here is also interesting, is that Schoeneling also holds that we can never really be post-truth. Truth is always shifting. Particularly in other times, we as society spoke of absolute truths. And perhaps that's where the trouble is, in we equate truth with absolute truth, but there are different kinds of truths. So interestingly, post-truth was one of the words that the Oxford English Dictionary picked for 2016 as its word of the year. It did end up as the word of the year in 2016. And the way the Oxford English Dictionary defines it, according to Wikipedia, is relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. And this is why, again, to go to Israel and Palestine, this is why we see the appeals to the emotions with the violence that goes on there and the conflict that goes in relation to one's personal belief as to Israel and Palestine. Just to give one example, we could have picked reproductive rights and abortion, for example, pro-life, pro-choice, what have you, you name it. There are many other examples and instances of this. But if we could go back to fake news, I mean the next slide. Sorry, Martin. It says back to fake news. That's the thing. So back to fake news, and we can go to the next slide. The back to fake news, it takes us to Wired magazine. And at that, this is a report from just over a year ago, in August last year. Wired reported on Wikipedia's volunteer-run battle against fake news. Wikipedia is run mostly whenever possible by consensus. Whenever consensus is not possible, it's run by majority vote, but it's run through community consultation. There is something called an arbitration committee that has several subsections, and there is now a subsection of Wikipedia's arbitration committee that is indeed looking specifically at fake news. So much so, Martin, if you go to the next slide, please, that National Public Radio, that's NPR, that's the main public broadcasting radio station in the United States. There's this very popular radio show that's on, I believe, almost every day. It's called All Things Considered. Just over a year ago, again, in April last year, had Jimmy Wales on it. Jimmy Wales is this guy you see here. He's one of the founders of Wikipedia. He lives in the UK now, although he's from Texas originally. He spoke at length about how internet users are adrift in the fake news era. And so what he proposed, this is a verbatim comment from this radio show, where he said, in this era where we've seen the rise of these fake news websites and so forth, Wikipedia has almost no problems with this at all, simply because our community is quite, it's their hobby to debate about the quality of sources. It's very difficult to fool the Wikipedia community with this. So the point, and this is where I'll conclude, is that the more open and connected people are online, the better things will be for everyone. But I leave you with something very troubling. So I'll just put this up on the screen, and I won't comment about it. I'll just have a sip of water and let you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Toni. So the next speaker is Marina da Bormida next to me, and she will be talking about legal and ethical aspects. Okay? So I just need to put on your presentation. Remember, the Slido is still working. We'll take a look at your comments and questions after the last presentation.
Is it running?
Yes, it's running.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. I am Marina da Bormida, and I am a lawyer specialized in research and innovation, as well an ethics expert, serving for European Commission, as well as external advisor in several European projects. I collaborate with CNAV, and I am also involved in the research and innovation division of multinational companies. Today I will briefly focus on the data economy, and in particular on the ethical values that need to be upheld under it for safeguarding the democratic and inclusive society. So, as all of us know, we have a lot of opportunities related to big data and AI. In many sectors, they bring these advantages, like in healthcare, agriculture, public administration, and transport. And they help also in addressing grand challenges like aging, climate change, and so on. And so provide a lot of business opportunities that need to be taken into account. It is not running?
Yes. You have to look at this.
Yes, yes, you're right.
This one is
Okay,
changing. You
yes,
have to
because
change
I
yours
am,
now.
yes. We have a wide range of application in several sectors, from business to public services, and above all, from the individual perspective, big data and AI are very important, and we need to consider that the individual is exposed to the influence of data analytics since the beginning of his life. And this raises ethical challenges, of course. A number of concerns and risks and challenges are raised by big data and as well by AI. We can mention some of these challenges, but we cannot linger over all of them, of course, because there is no time. But now I would like to mention, for instance, the lack of awareness of many people regarding their access to data, and the lack of awareness about the concept like data ownership, and the feeling of loss of control over data. We are living in a society where there is the risk to be in some way assessed and judged by the data. In some way, there is the new concept of dictatorship of data and digital identity. And this is very risky, very tricky, because the face-to-face interaction, the face-to-face communication is more and more replaced by the consideration of data. And the risk is to be considered not as individual, but as mere aggregates of data. This is a real and a true problem of our society. And related to this, there is another issue that concerns the risk of social cooling. considering that we live in a reputation society where each of our behavior has given a score, there is the risk that people tend to conform to certain types of accepted behavior and not to feel free to change behavior. And this is really risky. Then we have other concerns that are raised by AI technology, which are now more and more important, and we can mention just some of them. For instance, the risk of algorithmic bias, the risk of technological determinism, the fact that there is not certainty around the liability allocation in the digital environment governed by AI, and the issue of asymmetry of power between different stakeholders, the risk of manipulation, of misuse, of digital divide. So some authors argue that we are living in a VUCA world, characterized by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. But the question is if big data and AI and technology is the responsible of this or not. And how can we live in this kind of world? Should this kind of technology be considered only as enabling factors? The answer can rely on ethical values, fundamental rights, the need to uphold and to respect fundamental rights and ethical values, and to embed them into technology. So, in these years, in this time, more than years, one of the most discussed and important element of the debate is around data ethics. I participated 10 years ago to a workshop in European Commission regarding the concept of data ethics, and between the several definitions and concepts of data ethics, the one that can be useful for us to address the problem is this. Data ethics is about a responsible and sustainable use of data. It is about doing the right thing for people and society. Data processes should be designed as sustainable solutions, benefiting first and foremost humans. This should guide the future development of technologies. But which are these values? Which are the things we should rely on? There is a consensus at international level on the main of these. We can mention equality, predictability, fairness, accountability, transparency. But all is focused on human dignity, which is one of the most important. The importance of the human being in itself. And another important one is the need to preserve, to protect the autonomy of individuals, the self-empowerment, the self-determination should be governed. The European Commission is very careful about this concept of data ethics, of European and ethical values, and this is both in its regulatory sources and in the strategic research and innovation agenda. As for policy documents and regulatory sources, we can mention, for instance, the recent communication building trust in human-centric AI, which poses the individual at the center of the technology. The technology should be to empower and for the benefit of humans. And this is also important because in all the programs of European Commission, there is the mention of the need to ensure an appropriate ethical and legal framework. So there is awareness, attention to the program. We can remember, for instance, not only Horizon 2020 program, but Horizon Europe program that will be running in the next years, and Digital Innovation Europe program. Another important point as regards European Commission attention to these issues is that in European projects, which are on the top of the technology development, data ethics is increasingly considered. And there are different ways to consider this kind of topics. There are projects where ethics and law represents the core subject of the project itself, and one of these projects is eSites. Another type is where ethics and law are not the main issue, the core content of the project, but is part of the work. But together with many other elements, there is also the consideration of ethics and law as a work, a task. Then we have another kind, it is the bigger part of project, where we have ethics and law as requirement to be complied with during project implementation. We can mention, for instance, one when I am the external ethics advisor, and this is the FinSec project. It is regarding the integrated framework for predictive and collaborative security of financial infrastructures. There are a lot of technology, a lot of innovation and breakthrough under development, but the European Commission poses the constraints that they have to be complied with during the process of development of technology. And then we have many other examples in many sectors. For instance, in the healthcare sector, we have the flagship initiative Big Medialytics. And to underline the key topic, the key consideration from European Commission regarding ethical values, it also organized an ethics appraisal scheme which is under implementation in European projects, in currently developing European projects, and will be also in the next programs. There is a sector, ethics research and integrity sector, in charge of these issues, and it consists of 3 stages at the different level of development of the project itself, from the very beginning of the proposal stage to the end of the project. Why is so important for the European Commission to consider this kind of issues? Because the objective is to build a win-win data sharing ecosystem and digital environment that could bring benefit to all involved stakeholders, to the business, the citizen, the public sector, and the research world. This concept has been described in a recent position paper of BDVA, in particular towards a European data sharing space. It was considered in particular by the legal working group of which I am a member, and it is one of the new challenges to be taken into account. So, European Commission and Big DVA as one of its instruments rely on two dimensions: the recognition of the value of data as an economic asset, and so the business perspective, and the human perspective, the need to respect ethical values and fundamental rights. Only in this way it will be possible to reach and to build trust. Trust which, of course, is the basis of societal acceptance of technology. Another point that is important is that the European Commission appointed a group of experts, a high-level expert group on AI, and this group of experts prepared the ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI, which are now under the piloting phase, and it is considered as the first step of the commitment of European Commission in this direction. According to these guidelines, trustworthy AI should be lawful, respecting all applicable laws and regulations, ethical, respecting ethical principles and values, and robust from a technical perspective. This brings the attention on the fact that it is necessary to have an interdisciplinary approach, the cross-sectoral approach, to mix all the dimensions, ethical, legal, regulatory, and also technical. There are a number of requirements and ethical principles, and it is aligned with another initiative from the other side of the world, US, when we have the Global Initiative on Ethics of Autonomous and Intelligent Systems, which is based on the need to ensure that every stakeholder involved in the design and development of systems is educated and trained and empowered to prioritize ethical consideration. This is very important because it is a way to operationalize, to make things happen. How can we reach the embedding of ethical values into technology? In this way, by standardization approach, by filling the gap in this way. There is a number of driving factors that can help to address this kind of issues, and one of them, very interesting in my view, is the ethics and rule of law by design and the regulatory sandboxes. Besides, of course, accountability mechanism, certification processes, and ethical officer inside the companies, and redress mechanism as well. We can also have a number of questions to reflect on. For instance, if it is important or not, and to what extent it is ethical not to share data that can help to address grand challenges, for instance, in the healthcare domain. As a conclusion, we can say that ethical values and trustworthy foundation of digital environment and data marketplace is a key factor that can in some way mitigate the negative consequences of a post-truth society and can help to reach inclusive and democratic landscape and societal acceptance as well as competitive advantage, and so to mix different interests at stakes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marina, and this brings us to the last but not least. Yes, come. Yes. So Lina is going to talk to us about artificial intelligence and journalistic intelligence. So we're going to have a sort of robots against humans. Is this what we're going to talk about? Yes, I'm going to put your presentation through. the video, yes. Okay.
Yeah, we don't want to do anything to scare your children. That's the last thing we want to do. We don't want to scare anybody.
Massive climate crisis right now. The world is literally on fire.
Which of the goals would benefit the most from scientific journalism?
Se necesita tener una estructura de comunicación e información que permita que todas las personas tengan acceso a no solamente a esa difusión de los objetivos, sino también a las incidencias que se pueden hacer para que los responsables en la toma de decisiones puedan trabajar en procura de estos objetivos.
Would newsrooms benefit from a collaboration with grad students skilled in data science and applied research?
Bueno, sí, creo que nos beneficiaríamos, pero eso también tiene un reto, que es cómo lograr que dos lenguajes aparentemente distintos, que es el lenguaje de las personas que generalmente se ocupan de escudriñar en datos, se concilie con el lenguaje de los periodistas que andamos buscando historias, ¿no? Cómo lograr hacer una buena combinación de esas dos formas de analizar la realidad. It is time for journalists to save journalism.
Well, so my name is Lina Zuluaga, and I'm going to make my disclosure as Toni did. And my bias is I'm always with the students, and so I always am a student supporter, and I find solutions for any problem. So let's move. So I met Luzmeli Reyes. She was Time Person of the Year, as you could see, 2 weeks ago. And I talked to her, and I'm inspired by the work of journalists around the world. I'm a Colombian person, and she's Venezuelan. We're receiving 1.5 million Venezuelans in our country. This is the biggest exodus in the world happening right now. There are 5 million of people out there going to somewhere else, and I'm really worried about them. So with Phil Long, we are collaborating, and we're bringing these ideas, and I want to put these ideas to make this much more collaborative. So if you can provide feedback on some of these ideas, I will read. That's really coming from students. We really need you here. So there are several facts. I'm going to mention the summary of some ideas, which are what are we going to do with the problem of all these journalists that are leaving media companies because of the business crisis. The next one. The digital world will expand to 44 zettabytes of data by 2020. To put that in perspective, 1 zettabyte is equivalent of about 250 billion DVDs. And scientific journals published 2.5 million article papers, and only a small fraction of those findings can pass on to the general public. So buried in the trillion of bytes of the internet could be ways to find solutions of all the problems, but we're unable to reach it. So with Phil, we were analyzing, okay, so how we can use blockchain and artificial intelligence to solve the problem. So we're starting to check on the situation. So we were studying literature, the latest literature in blockchain. So we found these guys who can write, they proposed Provenator, a blockchain application to verify digital content. But when you read all the research, they also found that BBC, everyone is using human skills because artificial intelligence and blockchain are not going to be able to do it by itself. Let's go to the next one. We also found that Facebook also, everyone knows that they were unable to use their algorithms to really combat fake news. So they are hiring human editors, and we have the example of Wikipedia here. So artificial intelligence and blockchain are not enough. We need human skills. So we started thinking about, well, so what is the pipeline of talent? Where are the human skills? How we are building those skills? So we went to check what is happening with the students, and some colleagues from Stanford, they were running an experiment and analyzing what is happening with the students in 12 states of the United States. And they found that middle schools through college across 12 states did not know how to find the sources of the information they were reading, nor how to determine if the sources were credible and unbiased. The next one. So information literacy is converting to meta literacy, and I'm also asking why not journalistic intelligence. So they find that the full fact-checking and corroboration takes human skills, such as evaluating information. This is like a new skill. The traditional meaning of information literacy is being challenged to consider changes in technology, format, delivery mechanisms, the collaborative nature of information sharing, for example, Wikipedia, affective learning, and more. So, but if we check, for example, from the perspective of employers, what is happening, so the latest research on this specific field, employers' perception of critical information literacy skills. So yes, they confirm that they are needing those skills, communications, problem solving, synthesizing information, evaluating information. So they are saying that we need that. So let's take a look on education and enrollment. So we found that, for example, there is a precipitously drop of students' enrollment in the United States. There is a data that the Americans use to predict information to anticipate university enrollment. And last year, there was released a research on these intensive English languages programs are down 35% from their height 2015. And we know that this is happening in Colombia. The universities are really worried. The students don't want to go to school, don't want to go to university. So I'm in touch with Mark Schneider. He's the director of the Investigation Research Department of the United States, and we collaborate. And they were analyzing the academic year 2014-2015. So community colleges awarded 670,000 associate's degrees. And the 40% of those degrees are in one single field, which is liberal arts, general studies, and humanities, which I think what is needed to really build a more trustful society, people with communication skills. However, when you check curriculums, really technological skills, all the skills that are challenging the way we informate each other are not included. So let's take a look on the return on investment for students, which also is part of the research of Mark. So they were trying to solve this question: how much more graduates can expect to earn over the next 20 years compared to high school graduates? So next one. So they analyzed the data on Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, merging program level data on who graduates with snapshots of wage data through multiple years after graduation. And what they found was, let's pass by the next one, that, for example, bachelor's in computer science, this is a 4-year degree. So people are making 1 million more than high school grad students, right? And the next one is associates, this is a 2-year degree. They're making $645 more. And let's go to the next one. This is a bachelor's 4 years degree in history and just making this amount of money. So I was really, and in the United States, they're really concerned about people don't making the most money and being rewarded by the market for this type of education. So we're using, you can continue. I will not check, wait a second there. Yes, let's check the return on investment to check the size of the problem for the private sector. So technology, media, and telecommunication sector worldwide will fall short for 4.3 million workers with the skills that I'm telling you by 2030. Next one. And this shortage of talent will cost, well, this amazing amount of money. Next one. So if you check data, so there are sources of, there are a group of companies in the NS that uses labor market data, all the data that you post online, 500 million of posts, and daily, they update every day this information. So the last analysis that I did on this data, I was trying to focus on, okay, the skill of writer, what are the correlation, and how do you know what are the skills on demand and how much the market is paying for skills. So then there is a granularity that is interesting to analyze. And then I was exploring, okay, so a reporter, so people in media, they make half of the money that the technical writer makes with the same skill, but with no information on who is paying and how we use these hybrid skills to really go from something that is liberal arts are teaching us how to write, analyze, but without the credentials and without the skills on technical skills, we're not going to be able to make more money out of it. So it's very important to be aware when planning academics, career advice, and the universities really can we, let's, so yes. So no, the previous one. So here, after all these facts, I was starting to think, okay, so it's not only, but also. And then the next one. And what we end up analyzing is not only artificial intelligence or blockchain the solution. We really need human skills. It's not only university and the knowledge and the theory, because all our analysis, and it's incredible because we did a speech analysis on many presidents of universities, and they really are able to state that the skills, technical skills, are something that they are, no, we're not going to train our people, we're not going to teach our university students on that. Like, we're not supposed, but they talked from the arrogance, and probably because they're very comfortable in their positions, having a good salary, and so the higher education is kind of designed to perpetuate a group of people that I respect them a lot, but as far as I disclose my bias for students, I really need to advocate for students, because the money that the philanthropists, the money that everyone is putting in universities, we need to make the most of that money for students. And we need to think that is not only, but also to convince universities that is not anymore a knowledge, because when you read the technology, the race between technology and education, that was very well explained by Harry, the technology was a silo industry. In communications also was an industry, but nowadays with technology and digitalization, those skills are all over the place. So if we don't incorporate that knowledge and we don't combine knowledge, skills, and nurture also attitude, we're not going to end up with any type of job opportunities for no one, but with no respect of people that are doing technical work, which is equally valuable with people that have the knowledge and the theory of a PhD. So it's kind of a dignity position. And then it's not only open learning what we need, but we need a purpose. A purpose, so I'm going to elaborate more on this idea of purpose. So how we're supposed to bridge the valley of debt. So I already mentioned that technology, media, all the money that they're going to lose because we are not building these skills. The borrowed scientific journals that we saw that are there and nobody's using it. How we're going to use the talent of these journalists that have no home to publish, like Luz Meli. She had to create a new media in Venezuela after 20 years. Now she has millions of readers, but she has to struggle a lot, and there are millions in my country. There was like 3 weeks ago, a layoff of 300 journalists being laid off of newspapers, and that is going to continue happening. So we're going to do with that talent. As of 2014, 142 million worldwide youth to upper secondary school age were not enrolled in a formal education system. So how are we supposed to break those silos and have good news and a healthy society? So as you saw in the video, are we sick or under anesthesia? What? So the question is, do you think that could it be possible to provide accurate information to society, to bring more science in news? Sounds like reasonable. To give purpose to openness and to use a global framework to measure progress. United Nations is proposing the United Nations Sustainable Goals. Kind of everyone is familiar with that. Could it be possible to improve the return on education investment and to build digital literacies? So let's continue. So next one. So this question is for students that I know that you are here. Would students collaborate with journalists to improve their digital and critical thinking skills? Would you? Open? Okay. So we're developing and architecting this digital media apprenticeship. This is kind of the traditional education pathway, pre-K-12, K-12, primary, secondary, TVET, or college, which is 2 years or 4, grad school, and then continuing or executive education. So we're imagining what currently is happening in many parts of the world, in Korea, but let's think about at least shots of experimentation, because as you mentioned, the education system is very rigid and it's difficult to experiment because see the granularity. So we are designing a really short methodology to make that collaboration happen and hopefully to happen in several moments of your career. So you're gaining skills and you also can have a portfolio to show. Let's go to the next one. I cannot elaborate more on that, but in further, I can send you more information. Another question, there is a social entrepreneur in this room? Someone is a social entrepreneur here? Yes, you are. So would social entrepreneurs reignite trust and purpose to the global agenda? You were talking about that this morning, right? That's your yes. So when I talk about openness with purpose, and this is going to probably to the explanation that Michael Casey was doing this morning, the reason why when we are in Google and we check for something and that thing goes up is because for people that are not in the marketing or digital marketing, they have something that is called SEO. So they program the algorithm to say, okay, so if today we're gonna define that people looking for Lina, skills, Harry, Marina, Toni, the people looking for that, we're gonna put that at the upper part of the screen. That is programmed. It's not that we define it collectively. It's right there. So it is very difficult to compete because everyone is looking just in Google. That is the search we're looking. So the point is, we need to start to create this parallel idea that Michael and everyone here, I think, is looking for. So openness with purpose, but we need to define something that is difficult to make an agreement among millions. So let's start with the United Nations Development Goals. They have 17 things that makes sense. I can imagine how much they struggle to define 17 and not 1 million. So those are names that are easily, you can decide to tag what you're doing, what you're gonna write this article about, because you like climate change, you like education. So let's just tagging the things with that purpose. So to intentionally nurture the talent pipeline for critical thinking and fact-checking force is what we call journalistic intelligence, which is not artificial intelligence, because we need humans, we need students, we need every human to be able to participate. So the other question is, there's any journalist in this room? No journalist? I'm the only one? I was one. Okay. So would journalists collaborate? Would you collaborate with grad students to increase quality data-driven and science-based news articles?
I teach them now.
Great. So you are one of my guys. So the next slide, this is the prototype of the collaboration. So our idea is to create random in the future, but this is not a random because we're starting the pilot, so we need to create it manually. So I bumped into Luzmeli 2 weeks ago. the person that was in this video, she was in Washington. I was like calling my friends, pitching my idea. Said, you know who, you should talk with Luz Meli. She's coming to Washington. I said, wow, I'm gonna tell her my idea. And I was asking this question. Hey, would you be open to collaborate with other people that augment your skills? Because what is very expensive for newsrooms is to pay data scientists, is to pay someone in Malta that make the fact checking of something. It's very expensive to make the video that you just saw was a collaboration. We did that in 2 weeks. Students from Colombian Design. I called my friends like, hey, could you please check this? A retired journalist, could you please edit this? What are your thoughts about this? And then let's make this happen because we need to communicate and convey this idea that is very difficult to convey and make something that is kind of an example of a portfolio so students can have this type of video production, but in team, because also we are better if we are we more than I. As Keith Grossman said at Georgetown, he was the president of Time, and he was in my university 3 weeks ago. And when he mentioned that we need we more than I, coming from a person that is in media and saying that paywalls, it's impossible to decide that we're gonna put paywalls to newspapers and we have to pay for information, because the equalizer is if education already is private, also information, good information, with quality. So I was standing by that idea and say, hey, we cannot have information just for the people that can pay for that, because we're gonna have to go and live in Mars, one of us, and then let the rest of the world to die here and under smoked, and so we cannot. So this is kind of a very, we decided that there are going to be a group of roles, but we're inviting newspapers to open the door to publish this in the online version. Why not? I worked 9 years in a magazine, and a magazine always struggled to find good content because it's very expensive to pay the talent to make a content production possible and to make it at the time that you need. So the idea is to collaborate. For example, I was asking Herman this morning, I met him today, Herman Gretsch, the director of Times of Malta. Hey, Herman, I asked one of these guys, would you be open to publish? We are trying to create this collaboration. Would you be open to publish this? Sure. So we're gonna start asking Eri, because we need also a home to publish. Let's think about the journalists that are laid off of this world because of the financial crisis of media and the inability of the journalism industry to figure it out is forcing us to be creative. So yes, we're almost done. So the next one is kind of one idea of what this look like is we're gonna start tagging what you are going to produce as students. So you're gonna pick one of the development goals, the one that you like, your skills, so I will know that you like video editing, that you know how to do Adobe Editor, the other writes very well, and we're gonna collect the news and publish it. And this is just to bring some purpose, and what I was checking, and I just found that the United Nations are going to be under reform because of the lack of transparency. The entire world doesn't know anything about not only the United Nations, but are we achieving the goals? Who is keeping us accountable? So media, that was the role of media, but now the media cannot afford to make this map of who is doing what. And I think here there is an opportunity, last one, an opportunity to say that it is time for journalists to save journalism, and I'm not disappointed. I'm happy that every time I ask the question to a journalist, they are open to collaborate, retired journalists, current journalists, directors. It's time for students to save education. If you don't do this by yourself, nobody's going to teach you anything. You need to just go for it and ask for more. And citizens and strangers, and I want to highlight strangers, because this is not about, it's very difficult to go even to the bureaucracies, to university. No, this is going to happen among strangers to really save the planet.
You heard me earlier praise the Japanese education system and their reforms, and there is one area of their education system that they haven't reformed. They've done preschool, they've done basic education, early secondary. The one area they haven't touched is the end of secondary, because that's when people prepare for the exam to enter university. And the reason they haven't touched that is that parents are not supportive. They don't like the system. If you know East Asian models of education, there's a lot of pressure to prepare, a lot of after-school preparation and very high pressure. And it's hell for the students. Parents don't like it, but they don't want to be the ones that sacrifice the chance for their sons and daughters to get into university. So there's no support for that. So the exams actually prevent many of the reforms that we need to make because they are driven towards this. I grew up in a country that didn't have selection exams, so I never lived through that experience. But my son did in the United States, and it's a very different kind of pressure. And I think it does prevent us from doing many things we want to do, because you can reform everything and prepare people for the world of work, the combat post-truth, and so on. But if that selection exam is that deterministic, it really prevents the real change to happen. So when I was talking about assessments, I meant the kind of assessments, informal, formal, standardized. It could be tests, but not the selection ones that would allow the teacher to know the strengths and weaknesses of their students and then to cater to their.
Thank you, Joe. I would like to pass a very quick comment about your first two questions, because I do teach digital literacy. I have worked in that area, and the only thing I can say is that things are not trickling down into the education system. Okay, on paper, there are a lot of nice things, 21st century skills, you can read about it everywhere, but then when it comes to bread and butter issues, everyday issues in education, what do you have? You have the launch of a new vocational subject in the secondary schools, that is from 11 to 16-year-olds, and it is simple media communication skills, that is how to take a photograph, how to take a video, and editing skills, and nothing about media literacy and media communication. Okay, it's purely mechanical, and that enrages me. Okay, because it's a lost opportunity with a background in journalism and now into teaching. So Joe, yes, I think we need to do something. And in front of me, I have the director for digital literacy, and he knows that for the past 4 or 5 years, we've been actually trying to get into schools and get digital literacy, but even trying to explain the difference between information literacy, digital literacy, e-skills, information skills, okay? People still have different meanings, different understandings for all these things. But I think over here, we have a common understanding of what digital skills is, and Technic Fake News actually takes digital skills and not mechanical computer skills. Okay. Yes?
But before that, I wanted to follow up on, I agree with you, it's very difficult to bring in those new skills into the curriculum, but one thing that we found, if you interpret the 21st century to be the whole range of socio-emotional, non-cognitive skills, one thing we found in our research, while studying the topic of what would allow people to thrive in a world of automation technology, we found 3 things. One is higher levels of schooling, make you more automation proof, higher cognitive skills measured by things like PISA and PIAC scores, and higher abilities in those non-cognitive skills. So we don't know how to bring those in, but they will definitely help people navigate the world. In research by the Oxford research I mentioned before, Frey and Osborne, they did a subsequent paper in the United States and found that in those same areas, census areas where people had more likely to be affected by automation, were also the places more likely to vote for populist type candidates. And I'll let you draw your conclusion from that. So I think there is an emerging evidence base, but I agree it's difficult to find ways to bring it into the school system till now.
Martin, if I may, I wanted to connect some of this to one of the Slido questions, because there are some direct questions on Slido. And one that struck me was directed to me, which says, what makes a source reliable or non-reliable? It might be easy for you, well, this is addressed to me, to spot which is which, but us students, and so I take it this comes from a student, still struggle to spot the reliable source. And this is a point that you made even in your presentation. And if I may, I will go to the page I mentioned, which is Wikipedia : potentially unreliable sources, and read you the very first sentence, which is Wikipedia's requirement for writing articles is verifiability, not truth. This is a point I tried to make during my presentation, but perhaps it was a little too subtle. It goes on to say, we rely on what is written in external sources to write this encyclopedia, yet not all sources are equal, of course. The guidelines for identifying reliable sources give general advice on what is and isn't a reliable source. Then there follows here an essay which aims to analyze specific examples of sources that might initially appear to be reliable, yet may not be. If in doubt, and I think this is the answer then to the question, if in doubt about the source, discuss this, and the place that's proposed here, of course, because it's Wikipedia, is on the reliable sources notice board within Wikipedia itself. So the opportunity to have a discussion about what is, rather than claiming something to be, is, I guess, the way that I would approach even some of the questions in relation to the skills and whose agenda is it, who's paying for it, and, some of the questions that Joe was making earlier, yeah? Thank you.
I think Marina would like to make a comment regarding the third question, the ethics of algorithms and the people behind them.
Yes, I'd like. Thank you for your question. I think that the answer can rely on the approach of ethics by design. Ethics by design is to use an ethics-driven solution since the very beginning of the development of technology. And in particular, as regards algorithms, we have one of the working groups of the global initiatives on ethics of autonomous and intelligent systems, which is working on this. It is named Algorithm-Based Consideration Project, and they are studying how to embed ethics consideration into algorithmic design. So the answer could rely on this. And yes. And I would like also to add that as regards the European landscape, I mentioned the ethics guideline for trustworthy AI, but I did not have the opportunity to mention in detail the fact that there is a list of requirements, and beside this list there is also an assessment list, a set of questions that has been made to industries, media and so on how to operationalize ethics. And this is the piloting phase, to go from the principles to the practice of implementing ethics in the reality.